This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, a big welcome to episode 246 of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host, David Charlton. Now currently, at present, in this British summer, having said the word summer, I'm not sure we could actually term it summer though. Enough of the weather. There's been a lot of sport on. The Euros in soccer or football is coming to a close, so there's less matches. I've been taking a particular interest in this. I've also been enjoying the tennis at Wimbledon. There's been plenty of action-packed and really exciting matches to watch. Now, this is going to be the focus again of this episode, at least to a small degree. So I'm going to hone in here on Emma Raducanu. 3 years ago, when she was 18 years old, she shocked the world of tennis by winning the US Open in 2021. And she probably shocked herself, to be fair. Since then, she's had a lot of injury problems. She's changed coaches numerous times behind the scenes. Now, I'm not going to comment on any of that. The reality of sport, it is pretty complex, so I've got no right to go and make some judgments on decisions that she's made when I don't know anything about it. What I am going to talk about, though, is when athletes become successful and then they go through slumps. They have difficulties to maintain that high level of performance. And you see that an awful lot across a range of sports where somebody might win a major championship and never win another major. You might see a one-cap wonder in football or rugby, in youth sport. You might find a youngster does really, really well up to a certain age, then all of a sudden they drop off the edge of a cliff. So how, as a sports psychologist, do we actually go about helping them? That's what we're going to unpick today. So back to Emma Raducanu. And 3 years ago when she won the US Open. If we think about her identity at that point, before the tournament, she was a talented teenager, she had promise, she had potential. In her mind, if she was going to label herself, she would perhaps label herself as good, but improving as a tennis player. She wouldn't be labeling herself as a great tennis player. She may have also labeled herself as a promising tennis player. A tennis player with lots of potential. And then all of a sudden, within the matter of 2 weeks, that all changed. Or maybe it changed. There's a fair chance in Emma's head that that good player who could improve with potential became a great player. Became a player who needs to be competing at the top level. A player who's on billboards everywhere. A player who the biggest companies in the world are fighting over to be part of their advertising campaigns. A person who the media companies want to interview time and time again. Her life changed dramatically after that 2 weeks. Financially too. She'd be a very, very different person and in a very different position. From being the young tennis player who had to work really, really hard to earn a right to be on the tour, to all of a sudden having lots and lots of additional cash, lots of opportunities there. And yeah, this goes hand in hand with being US Open champion. But it does shift your identity. And as a result, the identity shift then goes on to mess about with expectations. And expectations is what I want to talk about now. So going into this US Open, there's a chance that yeah, she wanted to do well, but being a good player who's promising, who's improving, who's got potential, she possibly saw it as fun too. You could see that she's very, very competitive, that she's a fighter. And I'd imagine there would be no limits in her mind, potentially. Certainly watching that tournament, it looked like she saw every match as a challenge. And then all of a sudden, miraculously, or maybe not miraculously, she's very talented after all, she did get to the final. And then all of a sudden, she's a major champion in tennis. Again, I don't want to go into the injuries, the changing of coaches, or anything like that. I just want to point out now that her identity shifted an awful lot. And as a result, I'm going to speculate that her expectations changed an awful lot too. The label in her head might be, I'm a great player. I'm a major champion. And with that come high and potentially strict and rigid expectations if you haven't planned for it. Where instead of going into tournaments, having fun, seeing things as a challenge, all of a sudden there's a pressure. I must win. I must get to the semi-finals. Again, just note the must. Or I need to prove myself that I am major championship quality, if you like. And when the fun is taken away, when that pressure is there, when those high expectations, those rigid expectations occur, something different happens in the body, in the nervous system. Perhaps the way that she held the racket too. Tension just creeps in ever so slightly. The mind goes into overdrive. It may well have been rewinding back to the past when she won the US Open, and then flitting to the future and predicting future outcomes. And when the mind flits from past to future a lot, it can evoke lots of different emotions. And if you imagine if the nervous system is feeling a little bit stressed, you're flitting from past to future, you're not telling yourself great things as your form just slumps ever so slightly, as you're not winning. You stop seeing tournaments or matches as a challenge. You begin to see them as a threat. Success is actually about winning the tournament. It's about doing well. And then there's a potential to be trying to people please too. Again, going back to the identity shift. I'm a great player. These companies want a piece of me. They're giving me lots of money here. I need to be performing to a high level here, or a higher level. And all of this really messes with our head. And we start filling ourselves with different stories. And then when the mind goes into overdrive, we can start feeling like a fraud. Imposter syndrome can kick in. Lots of negative thoughts about ourselves as a person as well as an athlete occur. The athletic identity can shift, and this can then go on to impact on self-worth, self-esteem, and mental health. Now, as I've said before, I don't know Emma, I don't know the complexities behind her situation, and I don't want to speculate on that, but I have seen it with other athletes where this has occurred. So how, as a sports psychologist, do you help them in this type of situation? Well, let's be honest, if you've won the US Open at 18 years old, you're going to be on a high. And you're probably going to be on a high for a period. But then, as the difficulties come along, different emotions are going to occur. Lots of negative emotions, frustration, disappointment, sadness, potentially anger, are all going to creep in. If we throw in injuries, then similar emotions will occur, possibly real sadness. Even depression can kick in for some athletes. So where we come in here as sports psychologists is to offer a counselling style approach, where often we'll let the athlete ramble on and just get things off their chest, really try and process the situation that they're in. We'd paraphrase from time to time and try to help them make sense and try to shift their perspective so that they're not feeling as bad as they currently might well be. Now, some athletes can actually struggle with that approach. Many athletes are doers. They're busy. They're solution-orientated people. They're very practical people as well. They want to be on the courts or the pitch or the course. They want to be practicing. And just sitting there, offloading their thoughts, talking to someone, to them seems a little bit counterproductive. It seems strange. But as I say, what they're actually doing is processing what has happened to them so they can move on from the negative emotions that they're actually experiencing. And hey, it's not an easy process. For the athlete, it can be quite draining talking to somebody about negative feelings. The process, though, has to be respected. In some cases, there is no quick fix. Again, this is something athletes can be guilty of. They want that quick fix. They want that magic pill. They want to come and see you once, twice, and then all of a sudden you get your magic wand out and you change things. When we're in a slump and when we don't necessarily have the coping strategies to deal with difficulties, maybe we haven't dealt with them before in the past, it's going to take time. It can take hours worth of support to get to the point where the athlete is built up and is a lot more robust when they compete. So to be able to do this as a sports psychologist, to go through that process and help an athlete, you've got to be pretty skillful. You've got to be patient and you've got to be brave not to step in and offer solutions on occasions. Some people might be familiar with the term clean language. If you're not, I would say Google it. It's very, very helpful as a practitioner to use clean language. in the way that you go about things. Anyway, moving on now. So we're going to assume the athlete has processed things now. They've got a different perspective and they're considering their goals. They're looking at resetting their goals. Now, you may have guessed this. I'm going to try and help them as a sport psychologist to look at the process. So process goals. So yes, Emma Raducanu won the US Open and maybe one of her big goals is to win Wimbledon. That's fine. But how are we going to help her get there? And how are we going to help her navigate some difficulties that she's potentially going through to be able to achieve her goals? So to me, what I'm looking at, what I'm interested in here is the key ingredients that make up a good performance. And then we're going to check her expectations in line with these key ingredients. So in tennis terms, one of the key things is to serve well. I'm sure you would agree. That's going to make up a good performance. And maybe the expectation there for the player would be to perhaps get their first serve in 60% of the time. Again though, this is outcome related. It's not process related. So what can we do to help the player get their first serve in? That is process related. Well, if you think about it psychologically, we've got consistency in completing their routines. To some, they find it very, very difficult. When they're playing badly, when they're winning, when they're losing, or if it's an easy game or a hard game, different situations can mess with people's routines. So again, our job here as a sports psychologist is to help the player really dial in, get very, very specific with their routine, understand what they're like at their best in their routine, and then try and bring some of this in. So as well as routines, if we're thinking about Emma Raducanu at her best, for argument's sake, she's likely to be brave and aggressive, I'd imagine. And I'm sure you'd agree, being brave, being aggressive is a psychological characteristic. So how we reset the expectation and the outcome of wanting to get 60% of her first serves in, we start looking at bravery and aggression and what that means to her. We can get her to rate herself for every game that she plays for being brave and aggressive on her first serves. We can do visualization about being brave and aggressive on these first serves. We can have numerous conversations about distractions, different situations that put her off from being brave and aggressive. And we begin to reframe the way she feels about herself and her game. Another thing I'd imagine when it comes down to expectations, lots of players do focus on the outcome, on winning. So an expectation going into a tournament might be to win 3 or 4 matches to get through to a quarterfinals or a semi-finals, or perhaps to win a tournament. Now, to be able to do this, you need to show resilience. You need to bounce back positively from difficulties. So that would be my last point. When you're in a bit of a slump, things aren't going too well for you, that can be a struggle. So that again is another key ingredient. In our role, we would explore that, the thoughts, the emotions, the actions that all come with being resilient in different situations. When under pressure, when behind, after making mistakes, after making double faults. We might play around with the fun-like feelings, childlike feelings, the excitement, the anticipation that come with having a challenge mindset. And again, I will go back to visualization. Visualization is a fantastic tool to be able to bring process goals to life, to be able to revive an athlete's spirit, if you like. When the nervous system has been flooded with negativity, with pressure, with stressors, often by working with the subconscious part of the brain, it can really help athletes. And as you're aware, in most sports, things happen at the blink of an eye, really, really quickly. You need to be playing on autopilot, essentially. And again, that's where visualization comes in really, really helpful. If you're an athlete, if you're a coach, or a parent perhaps, I hope this episode has given you some ideas on how we help with athletic identity, how we help when people reach performance plateaus and then drop off the edge of a cliff, or after they've reached success and then they've had a slump in form, how we shift expectations to process goals, the counselling process, if you like, in helping athletes process, again that word process, difficulties and emotions. There's a lot to it. It is very, very complex. As I alluded to, certainly Emma Raducanu's situation seems very, very complex. And there's lots of things to think about. It's not just as simple as getting out on the court, being committed, being brave. It needs to be well thought out, where an individual's situation, their environment, the culture of the sport, their motivations, their past experiences all come into play. Now until next week, I hope you have a great day. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.